Here at the beginning of Lent, we find our readings drawing us back to the beginning of our story in the Garden of Eden. I think it is helpful not to think of the Garden of Eden as a specific place that we could locate today, a place with physical borders, but as creation as it was intended by God, perfect, fruitful, and flawless. And when Adam and Eve sinned, they broke that perfection. And their banishment is less of a command to walk out of the garden and more of a recognition that they have no power to fix what they broke. So let's look at how those things were broken. What is this tree that they were forbidden to eat from? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This can be confusing. It is not simply what would allow them to know the difference between good and evil. They clearly already knew that. God told them eating this tree is bad, and all the other trees are good. And one of Adam's jobs was to guard the garden, which by itself implies that he would have to know what would be bad and should be guarded against. The word knowledge used here is much deeper than surface knowledge. It is about determining good and evil, deciding good and evil, judging good and evil, something that God had reserved for himself. God is the one who has written goodness and evil and the hierarchy of goodness and evil into the very fabric of creation. And it's not something that we can determine and decide on our own. And so as both Adam and Eve were standing there, along comes the serpent. And we need to remember that the author of Genesis is trying to make our skin crawl with this creature. The Hebrew word used carries some of the sinister feelings that this should stir up in us. In Hebrew, the word is nachash, and it can mean serpent, dragon, cobra, crocodile, creatures like that. This creature is terrifying in appearance, and perhaps most terrifying of all, it is cunning. It is the most cunning of all the animals. This is a cold-blooded, scaly, predatory creature who is deftly twisting God's words to suit its own designs. And he tempts Adam and Eve with lesser goods. He says that this is a good thing that God won't give you this fruit. You won't need God if you only had this knowledge, this power. And we know what happens. They take the fruit and eat of it. And in that very act, they decide for themselves what is good and what is bad. And they drive a wedge between themselves, as well as all of creation, and God. Our second reading is from St. Paul's beautiful discourse on how Christ is the new Adam, how the old Adam brought sin and death into the world, and that the new Adam brings forgiveness and life. And I think that this reality is perfectly displayed in our gospel. Because in our gospel, the new Adam goes out into the desert, into the wilderness, one of the harshest and least forgiving places of creation. One of the places that has fallen the farthest from how things were meant to be in the garden. And he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. And then, in that weakened state, alone in the wild, the ancient serpent, acting like the predator that he is, comes back. And the serpent once again offers lesser goods. He knows that God wants such great goods for us, and he wanted to trick us into settling for less. God wanted to give us heavenly bread to nourish us. The serpent offers bread made from rocks. God wanted us to be with him in the heavenly kingdom. The serpent offers earthly kingdoms. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with bread or kingdoms, but when we choose these things over what God has planned, we cut ourselves off from God, much like Adam and Eve. But the new Adam does what the old Adam did not. He says no to the serpent, to the tempter. And remember that the old Adam didn't just say yes. At first, he didn't say anything. He just watched this unfold, took the fruit, and then blamed Eve. Christ is the new Adam, and the church is his bride. The old Adam simply watched his bride face off against this terrifying serpent. But the new Adam goes out into the wilderness, long viewed as the domain of the evil one, and calls him out. He does what the old Adam did not and steps between the serpent and his bride. He fulfills Adam's role as guard of the garden. But as we look around within the church and without, there is still sin, and the evil one is still at work. So what did the new Adam gain by his eventual victory that we have hanging over our altar? The victory often called by the church fathers the tree of life. He gained what Adam and Eve lacked, a way to fix what they had broken. In Lent, we follow the new Adam out into the wilderness. We deny ourselves these lesser goods to help us know that God is all that we need, to help us defeat the serpent as he did. And we remember that while we should be wary of the serpent and his temptations, when we do fall, we should no longer hide as Adam and Eve did, because we have a bridegroom who is always ready to come to our aid, always willing to fix what we break, and always hopeful to bring us back to God.